Thank you so much for coming. My name is Aaron Koreva, Director of the Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here joining us for the second public event of the third day of our annual Warsaw Week conference. This is our main event on the ground in Warsaw. We've been doing this is the third year. And this time we're talking about the theme of the conference is retooling the transatlantic relationship for an age of uncertainty. Today we're going to talk about an element that certainly needs to be considered and retooled. It's the economic relationship between the United States and Europe. As we all know, Europe and the United States are the world's two main or the largest trading partners. Our economic might together dwarfs by far those of our rivals. So if we get this right, we are going to get many things right. So that's enough from me for now. I would like to turn the floor over to our great moderator who will introduce the panel. Thank you again and enjoy this event.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this discussion about the future of transatlantic economic relations. My name's Tony Hausch. I'm a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. I'm a board member at AmCham, and I've got about 30 years here in Poland. I've seen some of the good things, some of the less good things happen, both at the local level but also at the transatlantic level. And today we're kind of at a global, what seems to be a shift away from the idea that free trade and globalization are the path forward to a more nuanced, mixed approach. And as the U.S. and Europe continue to have discussions, we hope they're continuing to have discussions. The minister will tell us about that, I hope. I think everyone is hoping that there's kind of an off-ramp in this collision course to ensure that, as Aaron mentioned, that the world's largest trade and investment relationship continues to be vital and to be a partnership and not a transactional discussion. And I think the other issue is, what role can Poland play, both bilaterally with the U.S., but also as a voice in the EU-US dialogue, particularly given its unquestioned security credentials and its leadership in defense modernization. Poland has significant capital in a capital called Washington, and how that might be used to temper some of the discussion and bring some balance to it. We're only days after the Polish presidential election, and we see President-elect Nawrocki preparing to take office. And from the point of view of transatlantic economic relations, he has repeatedly stated pro-transatlantic views, strong support for NATO, and for a strong sovereign Poland within the European Union. Now, ultimately, what all of those words mean in practice, we will see. But ultimately, while the impact is big domestically, what happens in terms of international trade and investment and relations is a chapter that is still to be unfolded. But today, to help make sense of some of what's going on and what might happen, we have four outstanding experts with us. We have Deputy Minister Michał Baranowski, the Undersecretary at the Ministry of Development and Technology, so welcome. Frances Burrell, a distinguished fellow at the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, and she's a senior director with the international advisory firm of McClarty Associates. I think without introduction, everyone knows Professor Danuta Kubner, who is a distinguished fellow. I'm going to. Distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, a former EU commissioner, member of European Parliament, government minister, negotiator of OECD session. Anything else you'd like me to mention? Yeah. And I used to work with her daughter. Then we also have with us, not but lastly, at least, Daniel Mullaney. He is a non-resident senior fellow, and he is the former assistant U.S. trade representative for Europe. So Dan has seen how it all works or doesn't work from the inside. And so, Minister, if I might start with you, and I would ask all of the panelists maybe to keep two overarching questions in mind as I pepper you with some more specifics. Can the transatlantic alliance in its current form continue without a shared economic vision? And the second, can a rules-based global trade system be preserved among the family of democratic nations in light of rising protectionism and talk of tariffs? So kind of a big global concept there. But I'll start, Minister Baranovsky, with you. Steel and aluminum tariffs have just gone into effect with the U.S. So given the short timeline and that kind of marker that's been laid down, based on your recent travels and discussions in Brussels, you've been across the water in Canada, how likely is it, do you think, that the U.S. and the EU can reach some sort of an agreement, if not a definitive one, by the July timeline, or will that July timeline slide?
First, fantastic to be here. Congratulations to Aaron. Congratulations to the Atlantic Council team. Tony, great to be with you, but also Fran and all the friends on the panel. I agree with you that we are in a moment where not only EU and US, but US with its other major trading partners is trying to find a new place of balance. We'll see at the end of the process how far we change the structure of international trade and investment relationships. So we are in the midst of it. To answer your question more directly, I'm coming back literally this morning from Paris. Yesterday we had a OECD ministerial where USTR Jameson Greer was there and attended that meeting. There was a number of bilateral conversations with Mr. Greer, including with Maroš Šefčovič, the trade commissioner, who is representing the EU in direct talks with the American side. So we are talking. That's good news. The second good news is that I think both sides really want to get the agreement, and we have seen in the last week and a half, a lot of statements, including from the American sides, that show a certain level of frustration, and we share the frustration when it comes to the speed of this conversation. So if two sides really want the agreement, I'm certain that we'll get an agreement. We will get an agreement, and it's a good question how good this agreement going to be. I think if I look at, so for those across the pond who might be watching, you might not, because everyone knows here, I know that Poland is right now holding the EU Council presidency. So our role is to keep the EU member states on the same page and do a lot of the behind the scenes, how to say it, the word herding cats come together, but it's more about, the more diplomatic way is to say, making sure that we stay united, making sure that we also have conversations with the American side, but without undermining Commission in its negotiations. And what I certainly can report from the Council's meetings, which is, public, that we still very much continue to have unity often greater behind closed doors than in public. We have a high level of ambition for this deal. It was a Swedish minister, Benjamin, who said publicly last time that EU will not accept a deal that includes 10% tariff. Now I can say that he spoke for Sweden, and I'll just leave it there. But I think we are looking for a high level of ambition, and we have time until July 9th, and it's been a bumpy road. It will continue to be probably a bit of a roller coaster, but we are moving forward with each day, including yesterday with Šefčovič Greer talks. Let me stop here.
Well, thank you. So Fran, As was mentioned, we're now at about, 32 days, 33 days, something like that, before this next deadline, which, we all know deadlines are never set in stone, but it gives people something to work for. You've worked on these issues a great deal, and you've seen a lot of negotiations. Do you have any recommendations on how the EU engages with a U.S. administration that, unlike perhaps past administration, views international trade as specific countries and specific sectors rather than a holistic, broad-based, strategic relationship?
Is this on? Yeah, okay. Thanks for the question, Tony. I would say that negotiations are never finalized until the last 42 hours, right? I mean, the fact that we don't have progress now doesn't necessarily mean anything. However, it is not a good atmosphere, is what I certainly hear, both in Brussels and in Washington. Let me do say that there is a deal to be made. I think a focus on the trade deficit, even though to some in Europe that doesn't necessarily make total sense, it is what the administration wants. And I think there are arrangements that can be made on LNG, defense purchases, maybe even future purchases of US sourced critical minerals, things like this. There was an offer to reduce the EU's 10% car tariffs. That is probably overtaken by events at this point, but I do think that there is a possibility of a deal, and particularly if you look, the experience of the UK deal is that the deals are kind of squishy in terms of not being really tough on specifics or definite on specifics and leaving a lot of things to be negotiated in future. So that's one thing, but I do think that there are major obstacles, and so I am actually quite pessimistic about a deal being done by July 9th. And that is because I think that the parties are coming to this with very different views of how the global economy should work, or at least how their role in the trading economy works. So the EU has offered mutual reduction of industrial tariffs, and I would emphasize the word mutual. The Trump administration is not looking for mutual. They are looking for unilateral concessions to reverse the US trade deficit. At least that's the way that it comes out. In goods, yes, we can get into that debate too. But at any rate, trade in goods. The other reason that I am skeptical is the process that is underway. So today, by, I would assume, the close of business in Washington, major trading partners have been asked to provide their best offer to the United States. And then the implication is that the administration will take the best of the best offers and pursue those with more energy. This is kind of like a real estate deal. I have a piece of property, give me your best offers by this date and we'll figure out what we're going to do. It's very difficult. I mean, we can say that the process of trade negotiations is sticky and cumbersome, but I'm not sure that this radical shift in process is going to be helpful to getting somewhere. So what does the EU do? I think the thing for the EU is to have a very intense conversation with itself about what is in its real interests. I have argued, and not successfully in Brussels, but nevertheless, that the EU should not really focus on retaliation. Instead, the EU needs to focus on its competitiveness agenda. I think it's important that the EU not put more penalties or more costs on its internal economy. And that's what tariffs do. So as we are experiencing in the United States, or starting to experience now. So I think that the EU needs to focus on competitiveness agenda, simplification agenda, and also trade deals with other countries. Tony, to your initial question about shared values and can open trade continue to exist with democracies, among democracies, I think in a way, for all its failings as a trading partner, and I know Dan will speak about this, the EU is going to have to take a leadership role in finding out whether those trade agreements that are not simply transactional and nationalistic can persist in the future. And we'll have to see whether Europe is ready to do that.
Thank you, Fran. Danusha, and this is where I had all your jobs here at the start of this question. But as a commissioner, an MEP, a Minister for European Affairs, and many other roles, you've been involved in many of discussions. While the clock is ticking on this agreement, from the European point of view, what do you see as potentially the critical, hot button issues? Will it be big tech? Will it be AI? Will it be, I don't know, maybe we'll be down to bourbon and cigars or something soon. But what do you see that could be the biggest roadblock in getting consensus among the negotiating team in Brussels?
Tony, thank you very much. I would like, you want me to respond to those questions, which I would do at the end probably, but I would also like to say that I agree very much with what Fran has just said. And I would like to say that if you look at all those kind of three categories of tariffs which are there, those who are oriented towards the deficit, where Europe will be hit probably, basically very, very strongly, but also those tariffs who are oriented towards reindustrialization, where you also have all the sectorial tariffs, which are also part of European heritage. And also, if you look at the baseline taxes that are on the revenues, also Europe can be hit there. So practically, it all can work against us and can make the discussion if finally we have a conversation. I mean, a real conversation, not just unilateral presentation, and if you don't agree, you just see you guys next time. So I think that there will be a lot of risks and a lot of expectations from Europe. But I would like to say a few words because I'm trying to understand, actually, I think we are in Europe trying to understand what is actually happening. Are we just seeing a kind of a way to destroy what is global and to make everything again national interest, local brand, so local? Is it just this, or is it, if you look at it carefully, is it just a very strangely, for my taste, calibrated strategic plan? That's also possible. Or is it just a political event or political process that is aiming at addressing the domestic policy, because that we know already also from the previous administration that also Europe is doing it. I mean, everybody's just linking those two levels of policies. And then at the end, what I think I understand, that at the end, all of a sudden, there should be globally, also in Europe, trust of our investors to go there with big pockets and just invest for years, if not decades, and make a sort of have a good outcome from the point of view of of America. I don't think you can get this trust at the end, and that's my major worry, that if we don't help them also to help those with whom we will be negotiating, also to understand it and understand why we don't have this trust that could push us to invest there, even though probably there will be a lot of interest on the European side. But this is something so that I don't understand. And I also have doubts, which allows me also to say that I'm a bit skeptical, whether the current administration indeed sees the role of Europe somewhere in this transatlantic, whether transatlantic relationship is still something that is seen as a transatlantic relationship. Because I think we are in this crumbling world, we really need transatlantic agency. It's not only about bilateral, which should be mutually supportive and all those good things, but there is also the global responsibility. And I think for this, I don't see that we are seen as a part, in addition to Russia, China, and America, where there is somewhere the place for Europe with what we have in our DNA, which is a bit indeed different. So I have doubts about that. And I also think that what is important to understand that in Europe, and it's probably stronger in our part of Europe, I don't know if Minister would agree with me on this, because I sort of speak on behalf of both. I think for us, what is extremely important is united West. If the West is not united, West was helping us. If the West is not united, then we don't know what's going on. And this is, I think, also it's in Europe in general, but also in our part of Europe, it's even stronger. So that's also, I think, very difficult. But that's the reality. I mean, that we might be divided. Russia can be used to divide us, or Russia can want to divide us. So this united West is also something which I hope that in such negotiations we can finally also reach this stage. But I also agree fully that for us, with all those doubts, without really fully grasping what is there, for us, it's indeed very, very important that we, in the meantime, that we do our thing. And our thing today is just what we all know, no? It's just building security-based competitiveness of our economy. That's absolutely crucial. And surprisingly, I belong to those who used to be skeptical about our capabilities to do a lot of things over the history of European integration. But I think this time around, we are really engaged, I think, and we are looking in a holistic way at all the aspects that would allow us to have the security, to have the financing, to have the investment, and also to link it with the economy, which I think something that America could understand. So I agree that what we should sell to America is exactly where we are and what we are doing. And additionally, I don't know if you know, because we normally meet among people who know how Europe functions, but my impression is sometimes that important people in America don't understand Europe. They don't know how they benefit from the fact that we are a customs union, that they don't have to enter 27 states with all the time the custom checks, that we have a single market where all the access criteria are the same for everybody. Where we have VAT, it's paid for also by producers who want to sell their products. So it's just a lot of misunderstanding about Europe and actually lack of understanding. And this is one of the things which I always think that we should have just like first half hour of the meeting, important meeting, to just see that we are on the same line, no? That we are talking about the same situation. So if this will happen, then I hope that we will make it. And I also think that it's important to have the capability, and I think we have, because of the history, to be able to say to our American partners in the negotiations that, to use the classic, that Europe needs US, US needs Europe, but the world needs transatlantic, whatever we call it, company or alliance, or just, so this is something which I hope that they will be able also to understand. And the last thing, your question, because we are talking all the time about trade, but if you look really what's happening there, the most scary thing is US-China, because it's clear about a different thing. It's not it's about technological dominance in the world, and how China is reacting to the tariffs war. It's also, you can see it now with all those chips. Also America, I mean, still President Biden was doing the same, right? Just controlling and blocking, and then they just stopped the export of the critical raw materials, Europe is equally or even more dependent on China than America. So here is the real issue, and I think that this should be about the future, not about this industrial reindustrialization in the traditional sense, but it should be about the future, and the future is AI, technology, everything that we were doing also in the Trade and Technology Council. All the discussions would be useful if somebody told them that there are good ready stuff is there, no? So we could have discussion also on this.
Well, thank you, Danusha. One comment I would make about the point about understanding Europe. Sometime in the recent past, the unnamed chief of staff of an unnamed United States senator arrived, and we were having dinner, and he commented that one of the problems that Europe needs to deal with is its borders, because he went from Brussels to Frankfurt to Warsaw, and nobody checked his passport. And it's a little uncomfortable because saying, look, but there are pretty secure borders. It's just defined differently. But understanding, if nobody checks your passport between Kansas and Missouri, but it goes to the issue of, do some of the people involved in these discussions truly understand the way Europe is constructed and the way it functions? And that is going to be a heavy lift. Dan, we're talking about trade, we're talking about these views about how the world economy works, but from your point of view, and based on your experience, I think the question I've been asked, and I don't really have the complete answer for, is, what's really the core issue driving this rush to tariffs and going into conflict with long-established trading partners and generally successful trading relationships? Is this coming purely from inside the administration, or are they responding to kind of pushback against globalization or fears of immigration? Because the world has moved on in the last 30 years. We're not going to go back to 1950s manufacturing type of jobs and those numbers. So in your view, what's really driving this kind of overturning the card table in the middle of the game?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think what's driving this is a legitimate concern about a range of things, including non-market economy policies and practices, including the operations of state enterprises, subsidies, a lot of this coming from China, but not exclusively, a range of perceived unfair trade barriers to U.S. exports, with the result of systemic and growing goods trade deficits, which the administration sees as a bad thing. So I think all of these aspects arise because we're not in the world of 1950. That was not a world in which China dominated, where non-market economy policies and practices dominated. It was not a world in which U.S. manufacturing and European manufacturing, in some instances, were being undermined. So I think what we're dealing with right now is a sense that the current rules, as they were conceived in the 50s and the decades following, aren't really fit for purpose necessarily in today's environment of China, of climate change, of a digital revolution, of a green revolution here in Europe. And we need a new set of rules. And one of the ways that you devise these new set of rules is to engage with trading partners and try to set new terms for how trade should be. And you mentioned at the outset the discussion on steel and aluminum. It's a really good example where the United States put national security tariffs on steel and aluminum. We, the US and the EU, then began a negotiation to see if they could reach an arrangement that would facilitate trade in market economy steel and aluminum and in sustainable trade in steel and aluminum. And there was quite a bit of progress made. And the object of this agreement was to see whether the United States and Europe could sit down, devise a new arrangement that spared both of us from the devastating effects of non-market economy policies and practices, and encourage trade in sustainable steel, sustainable aluminum, the kinds of products that are regulated the way we regulate and not the way other third countries regulate. And I think a lot of progress was made. Ultimately, the agreement timed out because we didn't reach an agreement by the summit in October 23. Both parties walked away with a certain amount of recrimination, with the U.S. saying that the EU was being too rigid on whether something was WTO consistent or not, and I think the EU had complaints about the United States. But I don't think it was I don't think it was necessarily game over, and should not have been. We should have continued that discussion and seen if there were a way to reach an arrangement on steel and aluminum that would address the non-market economy policies and practices in a way that the current rules do not. And now we find ourselves today moving into the exact same space where we have duties on steel and aluminum for national security reasons. We're now, I guess, beginning a negotiation about what kind of arrangement you could have that would maybe avoid the tariffs. And I think the underlying motivation for all of this is that I think there are a lot of people in the administration who do think tariffs are an important tool. And I think even the Biden administration thought that tariffs were an important tool. But I think it's clear that it's a blunt tool and it's a tool that can inflict some self-harm. So I think where there is an opportunity to look at the underlying causes that are triggering the need for tariffs, and I cited some of them: trade deficits, non-market economy policies and practices, unfair trade practices, tariff imbalances. If you can reach arrangements with good trading partners that address those concerns, then you can maybe minimize or avoid the tariffs. And I think ultimately that should be the objective, and I think the steel and aluminum discussion is instructive in that regard. So in answering your broader question about, can the transatlantic relationship survive without an economic vision, I think we do need to have a vision, but it can't be the vision of 1950. It has to be a new vision. It can't be entirely the old rules. It needs to be a new set of rules that address these new challenges. And I think if both parties, the United States and the European Union, approach these conversations as a way of addressing these new challenges and finding new arrangements, I think there is a very positive path forward. But both parties need to be able to take that step, need to be able to focus less on the daily drama of, is it 50% tariffs, is it 25% tariffs, did the Court of International Trade overturn the tariffs, did the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit reinstate the tariffs? This daily noise about the tariffs is, in a way, a distraction. I know for business it's very significant because that really hits the bottom line. But all the focus on minute changes or significant changes in tariffs is really a distraction from the underlying point, which is we are facing new challenges that the old rules are probably not suited for, and we need to creatively and aggressively sit down and find some way to address those challenges. And I think that really is the path forward.
Tony, could I attack also this
Yes, please.
guy next to me?
You're going to attack me?
No, I want to say, because you are actually a history of the institutionalization of our relations. You often talked about it, and you also expected a lot from the Trade and Technology Council, which was actually during the first Trump presidency invented and planned, and then we did it some years ago. And then you mentioned one of the big issues, which is this steel and aluminum, where we also, you didn't mention, we also established even a group which was working, a permanent group for this sustainability global steel and aluminum arrangement, which was also open, probably at a later stage, to third countries. And Japan, which is now doing business as investor in American steel, Japan was the first on the list to join. So this institutionalization of I think is extremely important. The second issue was the Boeing and Airbus, a conflict since 2004. The longest WTO, but it's also unfinished business, and I think we have to postpone the final solution, not till next year, March or something like that. So there is this possibility. Plus, every time we had some sort of institutional relation with different task force groups, forums on energy security, on financial, also this economic council, right? So we lack it very much, and because that also allows us to get acquainted, with each other better, and also to show Europe, and maybe there would be also better outcome of. So I hope that these negotiations that we will have now in G7, and then in Hague, and then there will be European Council, that plus now talking to Americans, that we will also find a way this kind of thinking.
The issues that we're facing here are not new. And Tony, you mentioned, how do we deal with this abrupt imposition of tariffs? But the truth is that this long and very specific list of challenges were things that the U.S. government has been reporting on for decades in some cases. They were subject of intense discussions during the transatlantic trade and investment partnership negotiations, which I led on behalf of the U.S. government, also as part of the Trade and Technology Council, which I led. Well, I was there for most of it, but the main point I think is that those are the same issues as we're addressing now, and so we know what the issues are. We know our positions very well. I do think that through the course of the TTIP negotiations, the TTC, the executive working group during the first Trump administration, which I was also involved in. We know where there are potential landing zones. We know what these broad issues are. And I think you can, in fact, pick up these issues that we've been discussing. As I said, they're all the same issues that are behind the tariffs today, and reach some conclusion. Now, why can we do that now when we did not succeed in TTIP, we did not arguably succeed in the TTC or the executive working group? I mean, I think today the situation is quite a bit changed with respect to China, with respect to the urgency of the issue. And so I think the situation now, I think if we were sitting down now and having, for instance, the steel and aluminum discussion, I don't think the parties would have walked away and said that that's it, we can't reach a conclusion. I think we would have said, no, it's important, it's urgent that we reach a conclusion. And so I'm thinking this is the moment where we take the learning from all these negotiations we've had where we dealt in great detail in these issues, and we sort of push them over the line. And why? Because it's urgent that we do so, because it's really important that we develop a new set of rules and processes for the trade relationship.
Well, Dan, you used a word that comes to mind about another tangent of this discussion, urgency. And one of the areas where there seems to be at times a little bit of a disconnect when we're talking about the tariffs and the trade is the largely agreed European consensus on rebuilding military capability, defense industrial-based production. And my question for you, Minister, is Poland continues to grow robustly as it has over the years. It keeps attracting U.S. investment, but it also has a very unique relationship with the U.S. in terms of its military relationship, its security relationship, its incredibly advanced work to integrate Polish armed forces and systems being acquired by the Polish armed forces with the U.S. military. Do you think that this can improve, this close relationship can help Poland's voice in the wider discussion about how we partner, how our view of common security and common prosperity has to be worked on together? Do you think that there is a role for Poland to play, perhaps an outsized voice in this discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Let me answer this one and also address a couple issues that were raised. So Poland is, as of right now, we have been playing a very active role in this discussion and largely behind the scenes because of the nature of this moment. We, with few others, are the most transatlantic voices in the Council. So, as Commissioner Hübner, Danuta mentioned, it's key for us as a national interest to have a united West. In a united West in the moment of perhaps one of the biggest tests of this unity in a very, very long time. So both when it comes to having the conversations within the Council, influencing the Commission, working with the American partners, this is all through the prism of we working toward a united transatlantic space, united transatlantic alliance, united West in the end. And perhaps it's from our perspective, it's been incredibly eventful time that the beginning of the new U.S. administration and the beginning of the trade war fell during a time of our EU Council presidency. But it tied our hands in some ways because we could be less outspoken about our national interests, but it allowed us to play this behind the scene role. Now, let me though connect this with few of the other questions or issues that have been raised. So I wish there were a few things that were like mentioned, that we should be looking to the future, we should be looking toward new rules, we should be looking toward a mutually beneficial solution and united outcome and a united West. It just doesn't feel like this at the moment. And it's not that it doesn't feel like it. It's not exactly the paradigm in which this conversation is happening. If we look to steel and aluminum, both of the sides agree that the overcapacity, the non-market behaviors are not in the United States, they are not in Europe, they are... China. Thank you. Yeah. Because I don't know what can say. Third countries. But we are actually, well, it's not that we are putting tariffs on each other, because we, the EU, have paused our steel and aluminum tariffs. We are already under tariffs at a 25% level, and soon will be at a 50% level. So that doesn't have the feel of a let's get a solution that is just good also for the transatlantic space. I mean the mode of this negotiations. I think we'll get to a place that will recognize there is a lot of, it's not really details, but there are a lot of issues that could be talked about that that American side, for example, brings when it comes to non-tariff. Some of them are barriers and some of them are perhaps not, my goodness, it's harder to be diplomatic. It's so much easier to say some of the things as a think tanker. For example, VAT is not a non-tariff barrier, but it's perceived as such by our negotiating partners. So we'll get this deal done because it's so important for both sides economically and for the world. But we really need to get to a very good mutual understanding of where we really are and what is a trade barrier, what is not trade barrier, what is the a solution that we are trying to aim, and we are getting there with 30 few days to go. Let me stop here before I get myself in trouble.
We'll just turn your microphone off at an appropriate moment. But Fran, I'd like to come back to you because one of the things that was touched on is the ability to engage in dialogue, institutional dialogue. And of course, the Trade and Technology Council is one of them, but there's also a number of working groups where my perception is, and the bit I've been around them, is the temperature's a little lower. You have subject matter experts and policy people who really understand the issue discussing, and they can disagree, but it's not throw down your toys and leave the room when it's over. So I think there's a general agreement these are very useful vehicles to prepare the policymakers for further discussion. But what do you see as the future of these vehicles? I mean, are they going to be superseded by either new things or simply just ignored and it will be purely political drive on this?
So I was a big fan of the Trade and Technology Council, but I think that we were in a different moment then where there was high-level political engagement and commitment to the relationship. And there was a real desire to take not the most difficult problems, because the most difficult problems, such as Boeing, Airbus, and steel and aluminum, were pulled out of the TTC or not put in. You can think of it either way. It was kind of like, don't kill off this baby dialogue by putting it in the worst spot, right? And giving it the most challenging issues. So it focused a lot more on technology than it did on trade, and that's due to a variety of factors. But I think that because of the engagement of really an extraordinary engagement on a regular level from ministerial level people, right? Including going to a small town in the far north of Sweden, which in terms of logistics and moving secretaries of state, I think was quite a challenge. They were able to give permission to people at the working level to come up with ways to cooperate with the EU. And that's not the situation right now. Aside from what is happening in our federal government service because of cuts and other elements, it's not exactly the time to stand up and say, I have a great idea for building better cooperation with the EU. On the other hand, there are challenges, and they're challenges that we need to address. And in a very high temperature way, I think that the current discussion about free speech between Europe and America kind of demonstrates the need for these challenges if we want to be addressed, if we want to continue to have the type of relationship based on values that we have had. So there is still a need for these dialogues on very practical levels. I understand that there is one dialogue going on now, dialogue may be too formal a word, on the security of undersea cables. And we both share that interest. So I'm not optimistic about the TTC or something like that, but I am looking to certain dialogues that in fact existed during Trump 1.0, and the energy dialogue, the China dialogue, there's also a competition dialogue, there are a few of them. The energy dialogue, for example, was used during the first Trump administration to discuss the dependence of Europe on Russian gas, and not always in the most polite way, diplomatic way, but I think it had an impact. And then it became a more positive, how does Europe and how does the US together help resolve the different energy situation that Europe found itself in after February 2022? Well, we now have the US as the major LNG provider to Europe, but Europe also has methane rules that are going to come into effect in 27, I think it is, for imports. And we need to figure out how US exports of LNG will be able to meet those rules. This is one of those non-tariff barriers. It's not discriminatory against the United States because it's about all imports, but it's something that needs to be discussed and addressed. I think that what my colleagues have been saying, I would differ a bit from Dan. I think there is a challenge where we do need, the world has moved and we don't need this, we can't have just a continuation of the old WTO trading rules. And I think you saw that during the Biden administration as well. Didn't start with the Trump administration. But the question, and there is a long series of issues that the United States has had with the EU. And if any of you want specifics, I would refer you to the National Trade Estimate, which is an annual publication where the US government, USTR, goes through and says everything that's wrong with everyone else's system. And it's a very useful way to see what the US government is thinking about. But I do think that we right now are lacking the dialogue together to address third country issues that are arising in the trading system. I think also that we need to understand more fully what the US government, and particularly President Trump, wants to accomplish with tariffs. And I think it's less about bargaining leverage. Some of them are bargaining leverage. Putting tariffs up on steel and aluminum today to 50%, I think, is bargaining leverage and frustration with the lack of getting deals. But it also is wanting to rebuild American industry and having to put up a shield around American industry in order to see American manufacturing come home. And if that is the case, if that's the primary driver of a tariff, it's going to be hard to get it off. It's not just bargaining leverage. So,
well, Danusha, if I might ask you that we see people say, okay, the US and the EU are negotiating. But you've said on the commission, do you think that the commission, in its current form and in the current environment, can maintain the cohesion needed to really make some tough decisions and sell those if we're ultimately going to get to some sort of compromise that mitigates the worst outcomes, of a trade war? I know we have the national interests, we have the various European political faction and groupings and their ability to cooperate, because I think one of the issues we continually hear, goes back to the old idea that Richard Nixon asked Henry Kissinger, what do the Europeans think? And he says, who do I call? And I think that's evolved over time. I think, the Commission and the EU is, of course, much more cohesive than it was then, but there's still a lot of pull and push inside. And my question is, is the Commission up to the job of perhaps selling some not entirely popular ideas in order to keep on a prosperity path and perhaps improve European economic performance?
Yeah, well, just still one word about the Boeing Airbus, because last time it's since 2004, then 17 years later we found kind of first agreement, and then we were just hitting each other with tariffs, and then we suspended everything for 5 years in 2021. But in the meantime, who is the winner of this fight between COMAC, which is China, and that we see how they progress. Now they return, I think, Boeing. So I didn't read it carefully, but enough. But so that's the consequences that we are. So I hope that also now both America and Europe will understand that we are going to pay for if we don't find this agreement. That's clearly important. And the second thing, which is extremely important, and because I think that we didn't mention business, but my the biggest hope that I have is exactly this transatlantic business that we have developed incredibly. And if you look also at American companies here, probably they spend half of they earn half of the money on our continent as well. So they are the biggest in many markets, and we are also there. I was in Austin, where the German investors were just praised like as the best one, and what could happen to this part of Texas. So I think we need business, and business should be now also cross-Atlantic, pushing us here and there, explaining what it means, such a uncertainty regarding tariffs and all the other consequences, but also how important WTO is for them as well, because there will be more wars, there will be more people crossing the borders illegally. There will be a lot of things for which we will need rules, and I think business understands it probably better than politicians. So we just to mention the big word business, this is extremely important. Now, if you think what makes Europe, I'm sorry for saying this, but that's what I think, superpower economically, is the single market that we have developed. It's the richest, the biggest, is 450 million people. So we just are not appreciated because we talk bad about Europe. So this is, and the second thing is of course the unity. And we, from time to time, when we are united, when we make overnight decisions. That was the question of Ukraine after the war. So we can be united. We are, I think, now going through the moment or time of being united. And actually, my understanding is that all the consultations that the Commission had regarding the first 20 billion covered by, and the second 100 billion euro covered by the proposal of the tariffs. I think there is a unity. There is at the beginning, of course, Ireland has its own problem that they would like to have it. Italy has another. Poland has also. Now Germany is today or tomorrow. Merz is there, right? So they will talk, which is also important for Poland because we are contributing to those cars, which might be tariffed so highly, German cars. So it's a lot of interest, but I think there is understanding that we have to be united to allow for the negotiations. I'm not saying they are agreeing with everything, which might hit them, but I think there is political understanding that it's an exceptional moment and we have to be united to allow Commission, and Commission is having now credibility because Commission has done, it was late when they started, but finally when they started in February, they are going very quickly with all the important things of which Minister talked, and we know that, so I think there is a good moment now to, of the unity. It's, and it's not only politics, it's also the rules. I mean, on trade, it's Europe, it's Commission. I'm sorry to say so, but that's what keeps us now together. So this unity is both political, but also requested by the treaty.
Well, I think that that is actually what the U.S. needs, is a strong partner to have discussions, and it makes the discussions a little bit tighter. Before we continue 1 second, the minister needs to leave because he was afraid of the next question, so he's going to disappear from that. No, but he needs to leave. So thank you very much for being with us today and with the council. So any closing thoughts?
Just big thank you, and I wish I could stay. I just have to go on to the other side of Poland, to Rzeszów. So that's why, wonderful, thank you. Wonderful to be on the panel, and fingers crossed for our negotiators from both EU and US. All right.
Thanks. So, yeah, no, absolutely. I was just going to say, though, I hope, Danusha, that feeling of unity can hold for the time being. He took the unity with us? Oh, no. Oh, no, he will take it. Yeah, definitely. We'll remind him. Absolutely. So, Fran, you wanted to make a comment.
So I just wanted to give an additional emphasis to what you just said, Danuta. And particularly regarding the business community, because I think when you cannot have a dialogue like the TTC, and the TTC was often criticized for its lack of engagement with the business community, the stakeholder dialogues, but it was a dialogue between governments that wanted to be engaged with each other. I think in the current circumstance, it is transatlantic business that is going to be essential in reinforcing the push for dialogues, discussion, the importance of an agreement, etc. We do know that business, and particularly big business, is a voice that the president listens to, that President Trump listens to. And I just want to emphasize that things like AmChams, but also Business Europe, need to come together and really focus on doing things together to ensure that there is a push towards agreements and not to veer off into two different trading systems.
So, Dan, I was going to ask you about the difference between goods and services in that dialogue, but I think you've already picked up your microphone, so you obviously have something to say. So please.
Well, I think I was going to note it is obviously critically important that the business community on both sides of the Atlantic be involved in shaping the solutions. I think the solutions do not come in sort of focusing on the tariffs and just getting rid of the tariffs. I think the tariffs are a symptom of an underlying problem, and the tariffs are a blunt tool. But I think business should encourage the parties to address the underlying concerns, and I think the fora like the Trade and Technology Council, for instance, one of the pillars of the Trade and Technology Council was to smooth out standard and regulation-based differences between the United States and Europe. Well, that's one of the non-tariff barriers that these discussions are aimed at. Part of the TTC was to coordinate our unilateral measures vis-a-vis China so that we can present a united front. And that, too, is something that is of real importance in these negotiations. So you can go down the list of things that we addressed in the TTC, and I agree probably without enough business input. But each of those issues is something that can be taken up in these negotiations and pursued. It may or may not be called the Trade and Technology Council. It may be called this other agreement. But if you look at the agreement that the U.S. signed with the UK, for instance, It contains some very specific things on some really sensitive topics, beef and autos. But then it also contains a forward plan on how do we address standards-related differences? How do we address conformity assessment barriers? How do we address sanitary, phytosanitary barriers? How do we address intellectual property barriers? So I think there is a world in which these negotiations can end with a program for addressing all of these non-tariff barriers, but with a great sense more of a sense of urgency. I think one of the phenomenon is when, especially on the European side, people say they say, well, why did the Trump administration react so suddenly and so brutally with these tariffs? I mean, we should be maybe discussing some of these issues. And I think probably from the Trump administration, they would say, we've been discussing these issues for 10, 20, 30 years, and it's gone nowhere. And now it's time to create a sense of urgency. We really have to fix these problems. So I think that's why the urgency is there. That's the reason for the abruptness of these measures. That's the reason for these compressed time frames, even though they're very uncomfortable. But I think all of this presents an opportunity to develop a new set of rules that address the current challenges. And ideally, you reach a point where enough of these arrangements can form a basis for maybe a new or newly defined set of multilateral rules governing the trading system.
Well, I think that is ultimately the takeaway we all hope comes out of these discussions is a new rules-based order. They may be new rules, but that focuses on maintaining and expanding the largest zone of peace and prosperity the world has ever known. And I think so we need to make sure people are keeping their eye on the big prize all the time. So that's the time we have for today. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your expertise. And I do hope that this is a conversation that when we have it again next year, that we will see that we're way ahead of the game and making some progress. So again, thank you all for coming. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you.